Welcome to another story written by Oracle 1. The Possession of the Deserted Village. Chapter 1. The road to Grey Hollow did not appear on modern maps. Daniel Mercer discovered it by accident, though later, he would question whether anything about that discovery had been accidental at all. He had been driving aimlessly through the countryside, chasing the promise of forgotten places. Abandoned factories, collapsed barns, ghost towns swallowed by time. These were the spaces he documented for his channel. Places where silence felt earned. It was nearing dusk when he saw the sign. It leaned crooked beside a narrow gravel path branching off the highway, nearly swallowed by tall weeds. The wood had rotted along its base, but faint letters were still visible beneath layers of peeling paint. Grey Hollow 2 miles. Daniel slowed. He had grown up not far from this region. He knew its history well, its farming communities, its industrial collapse, its steady thinning population. He had never heard of Grey Hollow. Curiosity tightened in his chest. He turned onto the gravel road. The path narrowed quickly, forcing him to drive at a crawl. Trees arched overhead, their branches knitting together into a skeletal tunnel. The deeper he drove, the quieter the world became. Radio static replaced music. His phone lost signal completely. After what felt longer than 2 miles, the trees parted. The village lay before him. It sat in a shallow valley, a cluster of wooden buildings arranged along a central dirt road. Houses, a general store, a small church, what might have once been a schoolhouse. Weathered but intact, windows unbroken, roofs sagging but not collapsed. It did not look destroyed. It looked paused. Daniel parked near the edge and stepped out slowly. The air felt different here. Heavy. There was no breeze, yet the leaves of nearby trees trembled faintly, as if reacting to something he could not feel. The scent of old wood mingled with something metallic beneath it, faint but persistent. He lifted his camera. The viewfinder framed the entire village in muted gold light as the sun dipped lower. It should have looked picturesque. Instead, it looked staged. As though waiting, he began walking down the main road. His footsteps sounded unnaturally loud. The village did not answer. He approached the first house. The front door stood slightly open. Curtains hung motionless behind dusty glass. A rocking chair rested on the porch, frozen mid-sway. Daniel climbed the steps. The wood did not creak. He pushed the door gently. It opened without resistance. Inside, the house was fully furnished. A table set for dinner. Plates laid out neatly. Utensils aligned with careful precision. But everything was coated in dust, thick, undisturbed layers that suggested decades of abandonment. Daniel stepped closer to the table. The dust around one plate had been disturbed, as if someone had recently placed their hand there. He froze. A faint sound drifted from deeper within the house. A soft scrape. He turned slowly. The hallway beyond the living room was dark. The doors along it stood closed. "Hello?" he called. No response. He told himself it was the building settling. Old wood contracting in cooling air. He stepped back outside. The silence of the village pressed tighter now, less neutral, more attentive. He moved toward the church at the far end of the road. It was smaller than he expected. White paint peeling, steeple crooked slightly to the left. The door stood closed. Unlike every other building, Daniel hesitated before touching it. The wood felt cold, colder than it should have in late autumn. He pushed it open. The smell inside was overwhelming. Not rot, not decay, something older, like damp earth sealed away too long. Rows of pews faced a simple altar. A wooden cross hung behind it, slightly tilted. He raised his camera and took a photo. The flash burst against the dim interior. For a fraction of a second, he saw people seated in the pews. Every seat filled, heads bowed, hands folded. He lowered the camera immediately. The church was empty. His pulse pounded in his ears. He checked the preview. The image loaded slowly. The pews were empty, but between them, faint distortions shimmered, shapes darker than shadow. Daniel swallowed. He took another photo. Flash. This time, the illusion lasted longer. Faces turned toward him. Dozens of them. Their eyes were wrong, entirely black. He dropped the camera. It hit the wooden floor with a dull crack. When he looked up, the pews were still empty. But the air no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. A whisper threaded through the church. Soft at first, then layered. Multiple voices speaking at once. He couldn't distinguish the words. Only the rhythm. It sounded like prayer. Daniel backed toward the door. It slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. His breath came faster. He reached for the handle. It would not move. The whispering stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. A single voice spoke clearly behind him. Daniel. His blood ran cold. He turned slowly. A figure stood at the end of the center aisle. Its posture was familiar. Its stance was his. Its face was his own, but wrong. Skin stretched too tightly. Eyes hollowed deep into darkness. Mouth curved into a smile that held no warmth. "You came back," it said. The voice layered over itself, multiple tones slightly out of sync. Daniel shook his head. "I've never been here." The figure tilted its head. "Yes," it replied gently. "You have." A memory flickered. A research paper from college. A rural disappearance in the 1930s. An entire village gone overnight. No bodies found. No official records. He had written a speculative piece about it years later, dismissed it as folklore. Gray Hollow. The name hit him like ice water. "You told them we were hysteria," the figure continued softly. "You told them we weren't real." The pews creaked. Daniel's reflection in the stained glass windows began to move independently, turning toward him with delayed precision. "I didn't mean," he started. The figure took a step forward. The temperature plummeted. Frost spidered across the floorboards. "You abandoned us," the voices whispered in unison. The door handle burned against his hand, searing cold. The figure extended its arm. Its fingers bent slightly backward at unnatural angles. "You belong here." Daniel's mind fractured under the pressure of overlapping whispers. "You wrote us. You remembered us. You opened the door." The air thickened. His vision darkened at the edges. And in the final moment before unconsciousness claimed him, he heard his own voice join the chorus, saying the same words. "You belong here." Chapter 2. Daniel woke on the church floor. For several seconds, he did not move. The wood beneath him was cold, so cold it felt damp through his jacket. His cheek rested against the aisle, and he could see the fine grain of the planks inches from his eye. Dust settled thick within the grooves. There was no whispering, no breathing, no voices layered over his own. Only silence. He pushed himself upright slowly. The church was empty. Sunlight streamed weakly through the stained glass windows, casting muted colors across the pews. The altar stood undisturbed. The wooden cross hung straight now, no longer tilted. Daniel's camera lay a few feet away. Intact. He scrambled for it, hands shaking, and checked the display. The last image showed nothing unusual. Empty pews, soft light, dust, no distortions, no shadows. His throat tightened. He rose unsteadily to his feet. His head throbbed as though he'd been struck. The air no longer felt suffocating. It felt ordinary. That frightened him more. He walked to the door and pushed it open. This time, it swung easily. Outside, the village looked exactly as it had when he first arrived. The same slanted rooftops. The same motionless curtains. The same oppressive quiet. Daniel stepped into the street. The sky was brighter than it should have been. He checked his watch. 4:12 p.m. He frowned. He distinctly remembered arriving near sunset. The sky had been orange, the shadows long. Now the light felt earlier, thinner. He turned slowly in a full circle. Nothing moved. He started toward his car. With each step, unease crept deeper into his chest. The houses felt closer together now. The road seemed narrower. When he reached the edge of the village, his car was gone. The space where he had parked was empty. The gravel undisturbed. Daniel's stomach dropped. "No," he whispered. He scanned the tree line frantically. No vehicle. No tire tracks. No evidence he had ever driven here. He turned back toward the village. It looked subtly different. The paint on the buildings seemed fresher. The wood less warped. A curtain in one window shifted slightly. Daniel froze. There was no wind. The curtain stilled immediately. His pulse hammered in his ears. "Okay," he muttered. "Okay. Think. Maybe he'd walked farther than he realized. Maybe he'd parked somewhere else." He retraced his steps through the main road. As he passed the general store, something caught his eye. Movement. Inside. Daniel stepped closer to the dusty window. The interior shelves were stocked. Cans. Jars. Boxes. Not empty. Not abandoned. The dust he'd seen earlier was gone. A bell above the door jingled softly. He hadn't touched it. The door creaked open an inch. Daniel stood frozen. "Hello?" A voice called from within. His blood ran cold. It was his voice. Clear. Calm. "Daniel?" it called again. "You coming in?" He staggered back from the door. The glass reflected his face, but behind his reflection stood another figure. Identical. Closer. Daniel spun around. The street behind him was no longer empty. People stood in front of the houses. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. Their clothing outdated, muted in color, styles decades old. They stared at him in absolute silence. Their faces were pale. Their eyes entirely black. Daniel's breath hitched. One of them stepped forward. It was a young boy, no older than 10. His expression was neutral, almost gentle. "You're late," the boy said. The voice that came from his mouth was layered. Multiple tones overlapping. Daniel backed away slowly. "I don't belong here," he whispered. The villagers began walking toward him in unison. Not hurried. Not aggressive. Measured. Purposeful. The sound of their footsteps was perfectly synchronized. The church bell rang suddenly. A deafening clang that split the air. Daniel flinched. When he looked back at the villagers, they were closer. Much closer. Only a few yards away now. "You wrote us," the layered voices said. "You defined us. You ended us." Daniel shook his head violently. "I didn't end anything." Memories began forcing themselves forward. His college thesis. Gray Hollow. He had argued that the village never existed. That it was a fabrication born of Depression-era panic. He had dismantled every recorded testimony. Every account of mass disappearance. He had called it myth. The villagers stopped moving. The boy stepped forward again. "When you erased us," he said softly, "no one remembered." The buildings around them shifted subtly. Paint brightened. Glass cleared. Smoke began rising from chimneys. Daniel turned slowly. The village was alive. Doors opened. More villagers stepped out, all with the same black eyes. "You made us fiction," the voices whispered. "And fiction can be rewritten." The ground beneath Daniel's feet trembled faintly. The church bell rang again. This time, it did not stop. The ringing layered over itself, multiplying, echoing inside his skull. The villagers tilted their heads in unison. And then, they began to smile. Not wide, not grotesque, just enough to reveal too many teeth. Daniel stumbled backward, tripping over uneven dirt. He scrambled to his feet and ran. He didn't know where he was going. Only away. The villagers did not chase. They walked. Always walking. Always at the same pace. And somehow, they remained the same distance behind him. He burst into the first house he could reach and slammed the door shut behind him. The interior was warm, occupied. A dinner table sat in the center of the room. Steam rose from plates of fresh food. 3 chairs were filled by versions of him, one younger, one older, one bleeding from the nose. They looked up simultaneously. "We've been waiting," they said together. Daniel staggered backward. "No," he breathed. The walls began to pulse subtly. Like breathing. The younger version of him stood. "You thought this was about possession," he said calmly. "It's about authorship." The older version smiled faintly. "You gave us structure." The bleeding version wiped crimson from his lip. "And now we're giving you one." The front door creaked open behind him. The villagers stood in the doorway. Not entering, just watching. The 3 Daniels approached slowly. "You don't get to leave," they said in unison. "You don't get to wake up." The house began to shift around them. Walls stretching taller, ceiling lowering, space distorting. Daniel's mind fractured under the pressure of overlapping realities. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he shouted. The villagers' smiles widened. "You didn't have to." The younger version of him reached out and touched Daniel's forehead. The contact was ice cold. And suddenly, Daniel saw it. Not hysteria. Not myth. Not disappearance. Possession. The entire village had not vanished. They had turned inward. Something had come through the church. Something ancient. Something that needed witnesses. Daniel had dismissed the only surviving testimonies. Had stripped them of credibility. Had erased the warning. The villagers' black eyes gleamed. "We were never gone," they whispered. "We were waiting." The floor gave way beneath him. Darkness swallowed him whole. And as he fell, he heard the church bell stop ringing. All at once. Chapter 3. Daniel did not feel himself land. The darkness simply thinned. Not into light, into space. He was standing again, breathing, alone. The village stretched around him. But it was wrong. Not alive. Not abandoned. Something in between. The buildings looked half-formed, like structures sketched in charcoal and left unfinished. Walls blurred at the edges. Windows flickered between shattered and whole. The sky above was a dull gray canvas without depth, without sun. The air carried a low vibration, like distant machinery humming beneath the earth. Daniel turned slowly. No villagers. No alternate versions of himself. Only silence. "Hello?" he called, his voice cracking. It did not echo. It did not travel. It felt absorbed. He began walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if gravity itself resisted him. The dirt road beneath his boots shifted subtly, texture sliding beneath his soles like unstable sand. The church stood at the far end of the road. Intact. Waiting. Daniel felt drawn to it, not by curiosity, not by courage, but by inevitability. As he approached, the humming grew louder. The wooden door stood open. Inside, the church was vast. Far larger than it had been before. The pews stretched back into darkness, rows multiplying beyond sight. The ceiling arched impossibly high, disappearing into shadow. The air shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from an unseen source. And every pew was filled. The villagers sat in perfect stillness. Hundreds, thousands, all facing forward, all silent. Their black eyes reflected nothing. Daniel stepped inside. The door closed behind him without a sound. He felt it then, not pressure, not cold. Recognition. The villagers turned their heads toward him in perfect synchronization. No anger. No malice. Just expectation. "You're ready," the layered voices said gently. Daniel swallowed. Ready for what? The aisle stretched long before him, leading to the altar. But the altar was no longer empty. A figure stood there, back turned. Familiar posture. Familiar height. It was him. Not distorted. Not rotting. Perfectly ordinary. The version of Daniel who had arrived here earlier that day, confident, analytical, dismissive. The version who had written the paper. The version who had called Grey Hollow fiction. The alter version spoke without turning. You finally understand. Daniel's chest tightened. This isn't possession, he whispered. No, the alter version agreed. It's correction. The villagers stood slowly. Wood creaked beneath the unified motion. You erased our truth, the layered voices continued. So we rewrote yours. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. The memories surged back in violent clarity. The testimonies he had mocked. The elderly survivor who had insisted something came through the church in 1934. The black-eyed congregation who spoke in one voice. The priest who vanished mid-sermon. Daniel had dismantled it all with careful logic. Had reduced terror to folklore. Had stripped credibility from the only warning that remained. The alter version finally turned. Its eyes were black. You told the world we were hysteria, it said calmly. And when no one believed, we were left alone. The villagers began walking down the pew rows toward the aisle. Not toward him. Toward the altar. You need witnesses, Daniel breathed. Yes. The word vibrated through the entire structure. The church walls pulsed faintly. You gave us narrative, the altar version said. You gave us permanence. The realization settled like ice in Daniel's veins. This place did not want his body. It wanted his voice, his reach, his platform. You want me to tell it, he whispered. The villagers smiled faintly. You will. The altar version stepped down from the platform. You don't get to leave, it said softly. But something will. The humming deepened. Daniel felt something inside him shift, like a door opening inward. The villagers began speaking again, not layered this time, but unified. A single tone, a single voice shared by all. And that voice began reciting Daniel's thesis, word for word, every line dismissing Grey Hollow. Every paragraph reducing terror to delusion. The sound vibrated through his bones. No, he rasped. The altar version reached him. Placed a hand on his chest. Ice cold. We don't need your skepticism, it said. We need your authority. Daniel felt something pulling at him. Not his body. Something deeper. His sense of self loosened. Memories blurred. His childhood. His college years. His channel. His audience. All thinning. The villagers' eyes darkened further, so black they swallowed light. You belong here, the voice said softly. And your voice belongs out there. Daniel tried to move. He couldn't. The church began dissolving at the edges. Pews fading into shadow. Walls thinning like smoke. The only solid things remaining were the villagers. And the altar version. You don't get to erase us again, it whispered. The pulling sensation intensified. Daniel felt himself separating, like ink dropped into water. Spreading, thinning, splitting. He screamed, but no sound came out. And then, he was standing outside the village. Beside his car. The gravel felt solid beneath his boots. The sky glowed late afternoon gold. The village behind him looked abandoned. Quiet. Empty. Daniel blinked. His heart raced faintly, as though he'd just woken from a nightmare. He looked down at his hands. Steady. Unmarked. His camera hung around his neck. He frowned slightly. I must have dozed off, he muttered. The thought felt natural. Complete. He climbed into his car. The engine started immediately. As he pulled away, he glanced once in the rearview mirror. For a fraction of a second, the entire village stood in the road behind him, watching. Then it was gone. 3 weeks later, Daniel uploaded a new video. It was titled, The Village That Never Existed. He spoke calmly into the camera, framed by his familiar backdrop. I recently explored a location rumored to be connected to a 1930s disappearance, he began. But after reviewing the evidence, I can confidently say Grey Hollow is nothing more than a rural legend. His smile was relaxed, assured. Mass hysteria, misremembered geography, and Depression-era panic created a story that simply refuses to die. His eyes flickered briefly. Just for a second, they darkened, then returned to normal. Sometimes, he concluded, the scariest stories are the ones we invent. The video went viral. Millions watched. Millions believed him. And in the quiet valley where Gray Hollow stood, the church filled once more. Not with villagers, but with new faces, new witnesses, all watching, all listening, waiting for the next skeptic. For more stories, like and subscribe.